basically for years, my family always used Gagne because nobody could ever get the French pronunciation. Um, and I always kind of wanted to go to Gagne, and was afraid that people would think that, like, all of a sudden we're getting fancy, because everybody knew me as Gagne. And then one of my daughters started using Gagne. I produce audiobooks. That's my day job, and a couple of our narrators insisted on using Gagne when they read my credit. But then the thing that really kind of tipped it was Siri on my iPhone. When I would call my wife leaving the office, I press the Siri button, call Lynn Gagne mobile, and Siri would respond, calling Lynn Gagne mobile. With that little added, like she was correcting me. So I thought that yeah, it's probably time to start using Gagne. Anyway,
well, I was first introduced to you with the Zombies That Ate Pittsburgh, and I think for many years I also said Gagne, and then I cross-referenced it with the wrestling family, the Gagnes of the AWA out of Minnesota, and well, now we finally have the answer. So that's amazing.
All of us George fans know your name via the book, The Zombies That Ate Pittsburgh. But a lot of us don't know, how did you meet George? What's that story?
Well, that story is basically was through covering Stephen King for Cinefantastique magazine. I had was able to get an interview with Stephen King really at the very start of this side career that I had for a while, writing for film magazines. And it's funny, I always tell people, at the time I was so shy. It was like socially crippling almost. And I always joke that I was like that character that Chris Farley used to do on those Saturday Night Live sketches, where he's that really shy, awkward talk show host for a cable show. And you know that book Salem's Lot you wrote? That was awesome. It was that's an exaggeration, but not too much of an exaggeration. But Steve was always very, very patient and generous with his time, and kind to me. And basically, from that first interview, it led me to being one of maybe 3 people who were covering any movies that were being made from his books for Cinefantastique magazine. Creepshow came up. I knew he was working with George Romero. I had been a fan of George Romero from seeing Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. Pittsburgh wasn't that far from me in Connecticut, and like I basically got Cinefantastique to pay my way to fly down to Pittsburgh to visit the set of Creepshow, and that was how and where I met George. Very nervous about meeting him. He, and I'm sure you've heard this from many people, he's like a big teddy bear, very approachable, was a very sweet guy, and kind of saw him almost in passing. And he just looks at me with a big smile and says, "Hey." And I say, "Hey, you're George. I'm Paul." And so that was how we met. And then what happened, I was working on the piece for Cinefantastique on Creepshow, and I wasn't able to interview George during that set visit, but he agreed to meet with me in New York at Laurel Entertainment's offices in New York. He had a room where they were doing the editing on the film. And I went down one Sunday afternoon. We spent about 3 hours talking. Again, I found him very approachable, very easy to talk to, very fun. And it just struck me that there was a really great story in his career that nobody had really told in any detail yet. So I had the idea of doing a book about him. He agreed to cooperate. Richard Rubenstein agreed. and that became the Zombies That Ate Pittsburgh several years later.
How did you, or what year did you get started with Cinefantastique, and was that your first writing job?
That was my first writing job. It was actually the Stephen King interview that I did. And actually, I'll back up. The first place I actually sold that was to Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine. I had a friend, Rick Myers, who was working with them, and they bought the interview. And that was the first piece I actually had published. Rick was one of the people, by the way, who kind of inspired me to want to do that, because I knew he was writing for these film magazines. It just seemed like a fun, cool thing to do. I was working my first job as a sound editor for a children's film company that I am still working for. We're a division of Scholastic now. And like my first 6 months there, I was assigned to reorganize a 30 years worth of quarter-inch recording tapes that they had in the vault. I thought I was going to die of boredom, and I went to Rick and said, I think I'd like to try doing this in my spare time. How do I do it? He gave me some advice, and then bought my first piece. And then that Cinefantastique, I just always loved the magazine. It was a real high quality magazine. It was really beautifully printed. I loved the kind of in-depth retrospective stories that they did on films that I loved growing up like The Day the Earth Stood Still, the George Pal War of the Worlds. And I just kind of loved the magazine as a fan, and approached them about doing some pieces. And the first piece I was supposed to do for them was going to be a retrospective on the 1953 film Invaders from Mars, which never happened for various reasons, but still a film that holds a special place in my heart. It was probably the first film I saw as a kid that really terrified me. And I'm really excited that they have done a 4K restoration of that actually comes out this week.
Sounds like it sounds like you definitely need to write that piece. And that leads me to a question that we normally ask all of our guests. That sounds like that was one of the films that maybe got you into the genre. Is there any other films that you can mention that maybe got you into this the horror and sci-fi?
Basically all of the Universal movies, all the classic Universal movies. I loved all of those. Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Wolfman, The Mummy, Creature from the Black Lagoon was a big one. None of them ever particularly frightened me. I just loved the atmosphere, and the monsters in those films were always presented as these sympathetic, misunderstood characters. And that's what I loved about them. Invaders from Mars was probably the first thing that I remembered scaring me. We lived 2 blocks away from a sand pit that I used to go to play that was like a lot like that sand pit that where the Martians are hiding underground and sucking people into the sand. It felt kind of close to home. It felt too real. But the one thing I remember was seeing it on it was probably on a weeknight, and it was either the following day or a couple of days later. I was watching my morning cartoon shows that I used to watch, and things like Leave It to Beaver and the Donna Reed show and stuff like that. And then the 12 o'clock news comes on, and it was a local station, and their first report was about a UFO sighting. And I thought, oh my God, it's real. And it was the first time I had ever heard about like an actual flying saucer sighting. And I just remember my legs turning to rubber and walking over to the TV and shutting it off. And I was just terrified that Martians were going to be in that sand pit 2 blocks from my house. And put a probe in my brain.
Do you remember what you saw on the Creepshow set? Because I mean, we're approaching the 40th anniversary of Creepshow. So, do you remember what scenes were there or what the atmosphere was like?
I remember it very well. It was that was my first visit to the Pittsburgh area. They were filming at what had previously been an elementary school in Monroeville, not too far from the Monroeville shopping mall. I stayed in a hotel that overlooked that mall, so I got to go into the mall at night and see all the locations from Dawn of the Dead, which by then was one of my absolute favorite horror films. But what they were shooting, this was a weekend in the fall. I remember it was the weekend that the time changed. For some reason, that detail sticks in my head from when I came back home. I got an extra hour of sleep in the hotel room before I had to come home. But they were filming some of the interiors for The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill. And Stephen King had about like half of the makeup on at that point. And I remember watching them film the scene where he is where he mixes a pitcher of screwdrivers, pitcher of orange juice with vodka, and it's the scene where Jordy is going through this cabinet trying to find the vodka bottle and pulling everything out, and he threw like everything on the floor, like a bottle of ketchup smashes on the floor, and then something else nosedives into that. So that was pretty funny. And then he did a couple of takes of pouring in the orange juice, dumping in the vodka, stirring it with the vodka bottle. And I think in the film they only do the first big gulp that he takes, and he says, "Needed that." When they shot the scene, he actually took a second gulp and said, "Needed that too." And he just did such a great job with it that the entire crew burst into applause when he finished.
What surprised you about watching George work?
What stood out was, and a lot of people that I met over that weekend said this, was how open he is to suggestions. He is very clearly was very clearly the director of the film. But if anyone came to him with a good idea, he was open to it. So I heard a lot about that. Didn't get to see him work all that much other than when they were doing the setup. I remember they were trying to figure out a way for when Steve's makeup was getting a little more advanced. He was talking about the illustrations in the old EC comics where like a corpse would have its mouth open and you'd see this stringy stuff like between the top and the bottom of the jaw and between the teeth. And was there a way we could do that? And there was a big conversation that happened around that. Yeah, I didn't get to see too much of him actually working during that. I spent a lot of time in Tom Savini's workshop where he was. I think E.G. Marshall had been there the day before I was there, and they did the life cast of his face and did a wax version of that Tom was working on and it was for the big effect at the end of the "They're Creeping Up on You" sequence. It was for his fake head on the fake body that the cockroaches burst through. So he was in the process of sculpting that, and I did a lot of my interview with Tom as he was working on that sculpture. And that was in the interior sets, and Tom's workshop were all in the gymnasium that was separate from the school building that was used as the shooting location. The school building had all the administrative offices and prop shops. The people who were what they called the green room. It was where the people were working on the props for the Jordy Verrill sequence, coloring broom straws green and sticking them into bases, and creating plant growth on an old-fashioned telephone, stuff like that.
So how long were you on set, on the Creepshow set?
It was a weekend. I flew out there on a Friday and went home the Sunday morning.
And I'm curious how you thought the scene ended up, or the Jordy Verrill segment ended up working out based on versus what you saw in person.
Versus what I saw in person, and this was the first time this really impressed me, seeing like on a film set, the number of hours that of work that go into creating seconds of screen time. And that was really what stood out, that they only used the first half of that scene where he's gulping the screwdriver, and there were maybe one or two quick cutaways that only showed like 2 or 3 things hitting the floor as he's pulling everything out of the pantry cabinet. It was very brief.
Well, unfortunately, that after Creepshow is over, there's a gap in George's career until I guess roughly 4 years later, with Day of the Dead. Is that right? 4 years? Is it 4 or 5?
Three. Creepshow released in 82. Daybreak was released in 85. So 3 years, depending on production or release. Yeah.
Yeah, I just mean, yeah, as far as when it was in production, it was like 81 versus
84.
84. Okay.
84. Yeah.
But what's happening with you between that time? Are you working on the book, or are you?
I hadn't started working on the book yet. It was kind of a vague idea in my head. I knew I wanted to do it. I think I might have done the proposal that I sent out to prospective publishers for it. And as I was doing that, I also did a fairly extensive series of interviews with another horror writer who we just lost a couple of weeks ago, Peter Straub. He was the co-author of The Talisman and The Black House with Stephen King. And when I first met him, Ghost Story had just been published. And that was another piece that I did for Cinefantastique. It was a cover story that they did on the production of Ghost Story. And there was another film that had been made, I think, either in England or Canada. I think it was in England, called The Haunting of Julia. That was based on a novel that he wrote called Julia. So I was working on that. That was a pretty lengthy piece. I contributed to a pretty lengthy piece on the Ken Russell film Altered States. By the time Day of the Dead was in production, I think I had an interested publisher in the book. And I wanted to cover Day of the Dead for Cinefantastique, as well as continue doing research for the book, and was trying to figure out a way to get myself invited down to, because it was what I really wanted was to be able to be a zombie in the film. And then Barbara Flughaupt from Pickwick Mislansky Konigsberg, they were the publicists who handled Creepshow, kind of called me up out of the blue that they were putting together a press junket for a group of horror, fantasy, science fiction film magazine writers to go down for a weekend and be zombies in the film. And I just jumped at that. One thing I remember about seeing him working on set was how much he laughed, and he was like that same. There was this story about how in the before he really even had a career, he was making Super 8 movies as a 15-year-old kid, and got arrested for throwing a flaming dummy off of a rooftop in the Bronx or something like that. And he was still that 15-year-old kid, you know. He looked like he was just having the greatest time doing this.
Talk about the visit today. How long were you scheduled to be there for, and then when did you find out exactly what you would be doing on screen?
We found out what we were doing on screen when we were there. We were flown out, and the only reason I can remember the dates are because of Lee Carr's really great book on the making of Day of the Dead. It's like really exhaustive, and he presents it almost as a production, like a day-by-day production diary. So I remember from Lee's book that December 1st, 1984 was the day we spent on set. So they flew us out the day before that. We stayed in, I think it was in Wampum, Pennsylvania, overnight, and drove us to the filming location the next morning, bright and early. They had told us to come, that they would be providing wardrobe, but to come prepared with a pair of really old shoes. So I had found a pair of ratty old shoes that they were my dad's painting shoes, actually. So I went there with those, and when we first got there, I remember we all signed releases. And then I never got $1. Supposedly they were paying everybody $1 to be a zombie. I don't know if the press people were exempt from that or not, but I never got my $1, or I'd have it framed behind me. But they sent us through this wardrobe area, and that had all these little partitioned off areas where you could go in and change. They would match you up with something that looked like it was your size. You would go in, put your own clothes on the hanger, which they kept very organized, and put on the clothing they had given you. I remember mine was a pair of pants with a shirt and a ratty sweater that they had applied this like a fake graveyard mold to. So then once we were in the clothing that they had given us, we were then brought to the makeup rooms. Most of the people went through this assembly line where they just did things like putting streaks and tips in their hair and coloring their faces. But we were, the press people were treated to being appliance zombies. So we were sent into Tom Savini's workshop. And that's where I spent the next 3 hours. Tom himself had a kind of a long-term relationship with Bob Martin, who was the editor of Fangoria magazine. So Tom took Bob and did his makeup, and Everett Burrell was assigned to me. And he looks at me, and I had this thick reddish brown beard, and he looks at me and goes, "You have a beard, I hate you." And I was so eager to be a zombie. I said, "I'll go shave it off if you want, whatever you need." He said, "No, I'll work with it." And he put these two appliances that gave my face kind of a skull-like appearance around the eyes and the cheekbones. And then added makeup to that to color it. Put like bits of blood in my beard. This gel, like a gelled blood. And 3 hours later, Barbara Flukop, the publicist, came into the room and looked at me and goes, "Oh my God, you look awesome." And I hadn't even seen myself in a mirror yet. But it was really cool. And I think the last touch was, I still have the last touch here. Let me show you this here, was the teeth. And I did save the teeth. These are my teeth. And they filled in like this area with like a dental alginate that dentists use. They kind of molded it to your teeth and
looks
kind of
great.
stuck in like that. And I had to keep pushing them in all day.
So did you end up waiting around a bit before your scene?
We waited around a bit. They were shooting some other things. We were in the production offices. They gave us lunch, which was barbecued chicken. And actually, like with all the barbecue sauce, it looked like a scene from the movie. Eating this stuff with our hands, then the teeth go back in. The makeup people were constantly touching up our hands. Me in particular, my fingertips were getting really sweaty. So this pink was kind of constantly showing through. So they were constantly coming over and touching it up. And at one point, I even started just like touching into my beard to color it with some of the. They use this, and my hair. They use this hair gel, setting gel, styling gel with that had charcoal dust mixed in with it to turn it black. And then they had us do two scenes. They herded us all into the mine area, and it's the shot at it's exactly at 1 hour 28 minutes and 58 seconds, I think is the exact time if you in the Blu-ray version of the film anyway, the Shout Factory version, and it's right after Gary Clark as Steele has shot in the door to get into the bunker area inside the mine. And he does that, and then it cuts to this long shot of a horde of zombies moving in after him, and they enter the door. And that was the shot that we did. We did 2 takes of it. I was, as one of the pressed zombies, I was put like kind of in that front phalanx of the line. And in the film, I'm on screen for exactly 6 seconds. And it's just that one shot. That's the only place I've ever been able to spot myself, although I'm told I have a couple of close-ups as well. I've never been able to find them. But it's that first group that comes walking through, enters the door. They had one camera on the group walking into the door. There was a second camera in the hallway. So once we walked in that door, we went down this hallway. And then they routed us back out to the mine area, and we did a setup for a second take. After the second take of that was done, then they did. They brought the camera up close, kind of panning over everybody, and they just had us reaching in and doing all that. And those are all the cutaway shots you see when the zombies are eating Rickles and. Who's the other guy? I can't remember the character name.
Not Rickles. Let's see.
Miller. Does Miller get his head pulled off?
Oh, that's Tasso.
That's Tasso.
Forget his character's name.
I can't think of it either.
But it was those 2 sequences where they're both getting torn apart and eaten, where they use these close-ups where we were all just like really close to the camera and reaching in.
Torres, I think.
Torres.
Yeah.
Torres.
Okay.
And those were the only 2 things that were shot. And then they did. I remember they for sound they did. They wanted us to do just a lot of for sound effects.
It's pretty good. You still got it.
Still got the teeth.
Yeah, that
too. I mean, because I spent a lot of time hanging with the zombie extras. What was the atmosphere like for all the folks that were the zombies while you guys were waiting? Were they excited to be there, or what was?
We were so into it. Yeah. One thing I remember, if you know the band NRBQ, the members of NRBQ were big fans of Dawn of the Dead, and they had driven all the way down from New England for this weekend to be zombies in the film. So they were there that same day. And in fact, I think Al Anderson, who was a member of NRBQ, is one of the people you see move through after me as I move off screen, and in that scene where we're walking through the mine and entering the door. But there was a lot of excitement, and George commented about that. He said that, like, ever since the first film, really with Dawn, after the first film became what it did, really with Dawn, people were, anytime they knew he had one of these films in production, they wanted to come down. They wanted to be one of the Walking Dead. They wanted to be particularly messed up if they could. They wanted to be pulling out entrails and pretending to eat guts, and so there was just a lot of enthusiasm for it.
So at this point, Day of the Dead is, well, you're knee deep in the book project. You've decided that Day of the Dead is the cutoff, or have you decided at that point that the Day of the Dead was the cutoff as far as where you were going to stop covering his work in the book?
Only because that was as far as he had gotten in his career. By the time I was writing the book, I had just turned in the manuscript for it when he was in pre-production on Monkey Shines, which was his first book, his first film after splitting from Laurel.
Can you talk a little bit about the writing process? What was it like working with George and interviewing him, and what challenges you had, or what did you find easy about doing a book on George himself?
The writing process, I didn't find anything easy about. It's a long process for me. When I first started, I was working on a typewriter, and my wife got so sick of hearing the sound of a page being ripped out and crumbled up every time I didn't like the way I had worded something. And then I got a word processor, an Apple IIe, that I wrote the rest of the book on, and retyped the first couple of chapters that I had done. But it took much longer than I had anticipated. George was always very accessible to me. Richard was always very accessible. They were generous with their time and giving interviews, clarifying things, and really everyone helping to set up interviews with people like I got to talk to John Carpenter briefly to get another director's perspective on George. Some of the actors, Adrienne Barbeau, and a lot of the people from his early days, Rudy and Richard Ritchie, who was the Ray Lane, who was the actor from Jack's Wife, and There's Always Vanilla, and they were very generous with their time. So did a lot of interviews, a lot of transcripts, and it was really a matter of deciding what to use and where. I had not seen any of the three films between Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead, which were There's Always Vanilla, Jack's Wife, which was also known as Season of the Witch, and The Crazies, which I thought, like each of them, I thought that There's Always Vanilla was the weakest of the three. It just felt like it was like an idea that wasn't fully formed, kind of a light romantic comedy that was maybe a little too light. I thought that Jack's Wife was kind of it was a more subtle. I thought of it as a precursor to Martin in some ways. In the sense that you have this I think it explored a lot of the same themes. Let me just put it that way. The Crazies was probably the most successful of those three. So it, you know, it was the first time I had seen those. It was the first time I saw Martin. Actually, I had not seen Martin yet, and one of the times that I spent an afternoon down at Laurel Entertainment's offices in New York, Richard Rubenstein set me up in a room with the VCR to watch Martin, which I had never seen. I was blown away by that. I was just it's one of his best films.
So Richard basically, hey, here, push play. See you in a couple hours. Basically.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I just want to touch on something quick. You had mentioned you had talked to Ray Lane, and Eric is a big fan of Ray Lane. Do you have any stories about the time you spent with Lane or Ray?
It was just a phone interview. So I never met him in person. The photos that are in the book from There's Always Vanilla were from Ray's personal collection. He sent me the photos to use in the book, and I returned those to him after the book was finished. And I just remember him being a nice guy.
Your book kind of served for you know, obviously it's an amazing record of the Laurel or the night to day portion of his career.
Yeah,
but it also serves as kind of a checklist. You know, a lot of the stuff in there, like the information on the winners, a lot of that stuff was not on IMDb.
right.
I think some of it's up now, but still, I don't think a lot of it is. How about the sports documentaries? I imagine that was the first time, or did you get a chance to see at least some of those?
I saw one or two of those. Yeah.
I think in the book you described you might have said the OJ one, perhaps.
The O.J. Simpson, or it might have been Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I know Richard Rubenstein actually directed that one.
That's right. So,
and they
you didn't get a chance to see the full run. So.
No.
Go ahead.
I imagine Richard had copies of those, but it was more of a footnote to kind of like an in-between stage that was what they did to establish their credibility as filmmakers as a run-up to getting back into feature films.
And I mean, the index, though, that's like literally the only record of like who directed what in the episodes.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I don't even think IMDb has the full listings of the winners on there. So, and it's to this day, it's unreleased. And actually, the interesting thing about that property is that there's all sorts of high dollar pop music all through that I don't think they necessarily got permission for. So I don't think it could ever be released. There's Beatles music,
yeah,
all sorts of stuff in there. So,
unless it was something that I mean, I suppose that was ABC, right? I suppose they would have cleared the use of any songs that they had, but probably didn't have the rights to re-release it after they originally aired.
Definitely not in perpetuity.
Yeah.
One film we haven't touched on, you talked about seeing Martin. What about Night Riders?
During that same marathon session, sitting in Laurel's office with the VCR, I think that was when I first watched Night Riders as well. I love Night Riders. I think it's an underappreciated film. I think that you know, in telling the story of this troupe who perform at these medieval fairs, it was kind of a metaphor for George's career as a filmmaker, and this group of people that he really kind of created this film community in Pittsburgh. In the Pittsburgh area, and I think it was like the whole film was kind of a metaphor for for George and his group of filmmakers that he worked with. I thought the acting in it is brilliant. Ed Harris is one of his first starring roles. It was really cool. I had the opportunity to work with his wife, Amy Madigan, on when she did the narration for a children's film that I produced, and talked to her a little bit about George. And it was actually on the set of that film. I think it was Warner Shook, who knew her from the Pittsburgh acting community, introduced her to Ed Harris, and that was how they met, which I thought was a nice story.
Mm-hmm. At Dawn of the Dead, or sorry, Day of the Dead, where are we at in the process of as far as approvals and writing the book? Is it underway at that point, or I'm just trying to get an idea of the timeline?
It's underway. It's I think that I had started writing probably in summer of 1986, which was maybe about a year or so after Day of the Dead was released. And I had intended to turn in the manuscript by the end of that summer. And it ended up going more to, I think it was February, March of probably February, March of 87 when I turned it in. And then it was published later in 87.
And I'm familiar, I think most of us are familiar with the paperback version with the zombies, kind of at the bottom from Day. And,
yeah.
But there was also another version that was kind of like a red leather bound with kind of like an autographed limited deal. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Right here.
There it is.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah, very
This,
cool.
The slipcase is back on my bookshelf there, but the publisher was Dodd Mead and Company. They asked about doing this and they were basically, I was able to sell my proposal for the book to an editor named Jerry, blanking on his last name. It'll come to me in a minute, but Dodd Mead was the parent company of Everest House, which was they were the publishers of Stephen King's nonfiction book Danse Macabre. And Jerry was one of the editors who worked on Danse Macabre, and that had done well for them. So he responded that they wanted to do the book. And I know that they had done a limited edition of Danse Macabre that was signed by Stephen King. So he asked about doing, if they did a limited edition, would George be willing to sign it? Along with myself, and we both were. So they did, I think it was 350 copies. 350 copies. And
that's cool.
There's
324, is that?
324. And those signature pages, we didn't actually sign the books. They sent us the signature pages, and then those were sewn into the books when the books were bound.
And was it just that initial pressing, the first run of each?
It was just that initial pressing. What happened, and a lot of people ask about why it had just that one printing, and it's been unavailable since then, is that Dodd Mead and Company, which had been an established publishing house in New York for something like 75 years, 6 months after the book was released, they went bankrupt. They filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The rights to the Zombies That Ate Pittsburgh, the copyright was owned by Laurel Entertainment, so that reverted back to Richard Rubenstein. and they did. I think they printed initially was 10,000 copies of the paperback edition, and the 350 copies of the limited edition. They had something like 5,000 or 6,000 copies of the paperback still in stock that they offered to me for sale. And by the time I responded, they had already sold them all to. It was the Fangoria people, the mail order bookshop that they had. So they ended up with all of the remaining copies, and I think they sold them out within 2 or 3 years. And it's never gone back to print since then.
It's a shame because it's certainly, I mean, it's at least $60 plus for the paperback version, and then the hard or the leather bound. It's I don't know what it's going for. People are always asking $400 or $500. I don't know if they're getting it, but
I saw a copy recently where they're asking for 5,000.
Wow.
For which I don't. They're not going to get that, but
yeah. But it's unfortunate that everybody doesn't have a copy on the shelf. Really, it's as far as I mean, it's really the encyclopedia of Romero for that first half of his career.
Thank you for saying that. That's been like a really gratifying thing, is particularly since Facebook came along. I am constantly getting messages from fans of Romero and who are fans of the book, who they call it the Romero Bible. And it's
pretty much.
I just feel really honored to have been a part of telling his story, and that people still feel that way about it. And the idea of doing an updated edition of it is not is somewhere in the back burner. And I'm hoping it will happen at some point. I don't want to say anything more than that because there isn't a timetable on it, but it's in my mind.
Oh, good. Do we know what the response was from George and Richard and those around him when the book was released?
They loved it. Yeah, they loved it. Richard bought. I think Richard bought most of those slipcased copies, and gave them as gifts to Laurel's shareholders. And but yeah, they were very supportive right through the publication of it.
You mentioned Lee's book earlier on Day of the Dead, and I know he received a little heat after publication just from some folks that were disgruntled. Did you experience any heat at all for anything that was included in the book? Or
no, the one thing that and it's something that I would like to go back and address if there is a new edition published at some point in the future, was the question of exactly when and how it became a trilogy in George's mind. George had always been saying in interviews that he had written a short story that had the 3 parts that were like kind of the bare outlines of what became the 3 films. There seems to be a lot of debate about exactly when that happened, whether it was right with the first film, Night of the Living Dead, or if it's something that crystallized when he decided to do Dawn of the Dead. There seemed to be a lot of debate about that, and it's something that I would like to revisit and set the record straight on.
Have you had a chance to see the amusement park?
I have not yet. I just bought a copy of it. It's sitting next to my Blu-ray player upstairs, and
was that anything that was on your radar during Zombies That Ate Pittsburgh?
It really wasn't, because George mentioned it, and I went back. I don't know if it was Lee Carr or someone else who asked me if I had any information about it. I think when Suzanne, George's wife, was trying to track down a copy to do the restoration that Shudder finally just released. And I even went back into my interview transcripts with George, and he really only mentioned it in passing as this thing he did. And I think it was during that period when he made those 3 films.
Mm-hmm. I think right after the Crazies, I think.
Right after the Crazies, before doing the Winners. And it sounded like it was like almost like an industrial kind of film, like something that they did for as a public service kind of thing to kind of illuminate the problems that the elderly faced.
I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on it. It's
yeah. I'm eager to see it.
Well, that kind of brings us into the modern era. Or George's modern era? Did you continue to cover him in your writings following Zombies That Ate
Not
Pittsburgh?
really. I kind of stopped writing after the Zombies That Ate Pittsburgh because we had our first child. I had a growing family, and I got a promotion in my job to the director of production, and basically my day job started to become too busy to leave me with much free time to do any writing, which I'd always been doing kind of in my spare time. All of a sudden I didn't have any more spare time, so I stopped actively writing. I did continue to follow his career. And in fact, one story that I have never really told publicly was that shortly after turning in the manuscript for the Zombies That Ate Pittsburgh, George was in pre-production on Monkey Shines. And I had been asking about working with him, and I thought like basically my skill set was made me best suited to possibly doing some editing, film editing. And George was shooting a screen test for Monkey Shines in New York at a place called Mother's Stages. I don't know if they're still there or not. This would have been in early 1987. And he had written the script for it. I think they had bought the rights to the book. He had written the script for it. And they were planning a screen test to see what could be done with capuchin monkeys. They had brought in the people who I think it's the Helping Hands organization out of Boston. They train capuchin monkeys to work with paraplegic and quadriplegic patients who are wheelchair bound, to assist with doing certain physical tasks. And they brought them in, and basically I volunteered my services to edit the screen test, and went down to New York for the weekend to work on that. I was able to watch the filming. They had three capuchins that they were working with, and they could get them to do these anything they did had to be done in like quick shots. They could get them to do like by like pointing a laser pointer at a plug in the wall. The monkey would run over and pull the plug out of the wall to kill the lights, and that was the take. And it was a lot of that. They would use laser pointers to show the monkey where to run to. So it all had to be done in these quick little takes, and then they got these rewards, which was they would give them a straw filled with grape juice. It was white grape juice that they really loved. So I got to watch that. It was really fun watching George work. He had storyboarded this sequence where a woman is alone in an apartment and hears a noise, and it's this monkey is stalking her. And it ends with she turns around and screams, and the monkey is sitting on a table where he's opened up a drawer and taken out a knife. And that was the screen test. George had titled it "Signifying Monkey." Which, if you remember a scene in Knight Riders, where I think it's Donald Rubinstein is playing the guitar and singing the song "Signifying Monkey" around a campfire, and that's where that came from. And that entire weekend, George would just burst into, "We always line and signify, but you better not monkey with me." And he was very musical. I remember somebody telling me that he would frequently be doing like his impression of a tuba, like a movie theme on a tuba. And I didn't quite know what they meant, and all of a sudden he would start doing. So he did a lot of that, like in between takes.
Did you continue to follow George's career in the films that he released, and was there any highlights, personal highlights on the back half?
I did. I really liked Monkey Shines, which I still call Monkey Shines. I didn't like the addition of an experiment in fear to the title. And the three, I loved Bruiser. I hadn't seen George since in between working on that screen test and Bruiser. I hadn't seen him for a period of it must have been like 13 years or so. And in summer of 2000, maybe it was 2001, he was on his way back from visiting his daughter, who was at a circus school up in Maine. And passing through Connecticut, knew that we lived in Connecticut, and called me up. We're passing through, wondering if we could see you guys. Our house was a disaster because we had just come home from Cape Cod. So I said, well, the house is a mess, but there's a restaurant right nearby if you want to stop and meet there. Yeah. So we stopped and had dinner, and he kind of filled me in on everything that had been happening up until then. And he had recently completed Bruiser, which I think was one of his most overlooked and best films. He was very proud of it. He was, and I remember him telling me that it was the first film he had done since Martin that that he called his most realized film since Martin, in the sense that what ended up on screen was exactly what he envisioned when he set out to make the film. And I think being on a low budget and kind of calling his own shots let the creative juices flow, and he was able to do exactly what he wanted with it. I loved the three later zombie films. Diary of the Dead is probably my favorite of the three, which I don't know if I think there was another film that was supposed to be the actual third part of that second trilogy. And Diary of the Dead was like an extra that was thrown in at some point. I don't know the exact background of it. Diary of the Dead to me was, and maybe got a little heavy-handed with this, but it was the first Living Dead film he had done since Dawn that I felt was a reflection of the era in which it was made. And this whole idea of, and I think there's a line in the film about if it's not on the internet, did it really happen?
Yeah.
Yeah, Diary in particular was about 10 years ahead of its time, because I think I remember one of the critiques at the time was even the expediency of how they were able to upload the video to the web and how unrealistic that was. But flash forward to today, and that was slow.
Right,
we
right.
would have had that uploaded on the road before we even got to that station. So
Yeah.
Right.
And
But,
George's disdain for technology really shone through in that one, because he was not a fan of all the computer stuff, the email, and especially social medias. It was, like Eric said, way ahead of its time, and it took a while for it to really resonate. But when you go back and look at it, and you go, "Yeah, that's what we've become. We were on track for that."
Well, I
Yeah,
recall at
yeah.
that time, it's like I don't go to MySpace for
Yeah.
news, but
Yeah.
nowadays, nowadays I get plenty of news on my social media feed. It's about all
Yeah.
it is. So
Yeah.
no, it was, yeah, it's the Diary and Land in particular have gotten better with age. They seem to
Yeah.
be better. They continue to be relevant.
Paul, what are you working on? What are you up to these days? What's in your workspace?
What's in my workspace these days? As I mentioned, I produce and direct video and audiobook recordings of children's books for a division of Scholastic. I've done a lot of we've done a lot of animated films with Mo Willems, who is the author illustrator of Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus and Knuffle Bunny. And we've done audiobooks. Matt, I think we exchanged some messages on Facebook. We were working on re-recording the 3 Hunger Games audiobooks for the 10th anniversary of the Hunger Games. And I had always been really, since watching Orphan Black, was really impressed with Tatiana Maslany, and had asked about getting her to do something else, because all those characters that she did on Orphan Black so seamlessly, just creating such distinct personalities for each one seemed like something that would translate well to audiobooks. We had a project that required a lot of different accents, and I offered it to her agent, and so that they were just going into production. I think it was like the 4th or 5th season at the time, and she said, well, she can't do it right now because they're just going into production on this, and she's busy every day while they're shooting on Orphan Black. But it is something that it is the kind of thing she'd be interested in, so please ask again. And then the re-recording the Hunger Games came up, and she was doing a play in New York, so it just it worked out perfectly. She did the one play and was recording the Hunger Games in the mornings and doing the play in the evenings, and then that play led right into doing Network on Broadway with Bryan Cranston. So we had her in New York for another 6 months, and she did books 2 and 3 in the Hunger Games series. But as you probably are aware, one of her very first acting roles was in Diary of the Dead. And when I met her, that was one of the first questions I asked. How did you like working with George Romero? And she had this story about like one of her most vivid memories was going for the audition. She really wanted the job. She was in awe of him, meeting him for the first time and leaving the audition and going to shake his hand. And she said she wasn't prepared for how physically large he was. And she reaches out to shake his hand and just grabbed his thumb. And oh my God, I just blew that. But then of course she got it. And
safe. You are to tune to the emergency station.